agenda item. I've got a short presentation to do just to kick that discussion off. Then we've got two reports from subcommittee that we're going to be discussing. The first is narrowing the achievement gap in terms of education, not narrowing the achievement as it says on our agenda, which should sort of be the opposite of what is intended. And then secondly, Southwark's adoption service. So two really crucial areas. And then finally, we're going to have a short discussion about rents for council premises, which is an ongoing piece of scrutiny. We were due to have some information in order to support that discussion. We haven't had that information, but I will come to that when we come to that agenda item. So moving on to item 2, which is notification of any items that I deem urgent. So there's no other items at the moment. Disclosure of interest and dispensations. Do any members of the committee have any interest which they wish to declare at this stage? No? Great. Okay. Item 4, the minutes of the last meeting. Can we agree those as a proper record of the last meeting? Okay. Great. And whilst we're on the issue of the minutes, we were having a brief discussion about this before the meeting. Clearly, it's quite an onerous task for officers to continuously have to write up the minutes of a meeting, and it's obvious why that's an important role when you're not recording, you know, a situation where the full proceedings of these meetings are recorded. Like a briefer
has been cut.
Yeah.
We actually are very short on voices now, so our hope is that these would replace the detail,
yeah,
and that all that we would record. I have wondered whether you could cut out notes altogether. I don't think you can cut them out completely, because I think the member of the public needs to know, why do I want to log in and have a look at this, what's interesting there, and you must capture decisions. But we want to try and be as minimal as we possibly can, just so we can drive some efficiency out.
So is everybody comfortable with that, from moving on from a situation where we have to, you know, people have to spend hours and hours and hours writing minutes to, I mean, we'll leave it to your judgment, Shelley, but much briefer. It's obviously fine if we're having a recording of the meeting. Great. So, scrutiny arrangements for 2015-16. So, we have 3 tasks, mainly, which are to elect the vice chair, secondly, to confirm the names of the subcommittee for the coming year, and also to elect the chairs of the subcommittees as well. So, first of all, to elect the vice chair, do we have any nominations for the vice chair of the committee? You can self-nominate.
I would like to carry on as vice chair.
Well, I will second. I will second that as well. So, and are there any other nominations? No. Great. Well, congratulations, Rosie. You are the vice chair of OSC. So, next up, the names of the subcommittees. So, just to confirm what the current names are, Tom, you are Housing and Community Safety, Scrutiny Subcommittee, and Jasmine, your committee's full name?
Education and Children's Services Committee.
Education and Children, and Rebecca, the full name of your committee?
Community Committee.
Okay. Do any of you see any need to make any changes to those names at this stage?
Actually, I hadn't really thought about it, but the committee did think maybe we should add health into that, because I'll explain, not health per se, but on the children's side, because one of the critical areas that we're looking at now, or my review shows, which I'll talk to a bit later on, is a crisis of care. And while it's obvious, you know, that if you're looking at children's services as it encompasses, I think it's politic now, or policy, to see that in. So I think, you know, maybe we should add health to the title of that. I know it seems weird, because last year I came along and wanted to shrink everything out of the title of my committee, but now I think we should add health.
Well, my own view is that I mean, the issue you've outlined is significant, but the way to deal with it is to increase the amount of teamwork in between the subcommittees, which is something we'll come on to in the work programming. But as we already have a subcommittee that covers that area, you know, that has a dedicated responsibility for that area, it would seem a bit strange to have another committee where children's health was part of your responsibility. I think that could lead to quite a lot of confusion.
But isn't children's health part of our responsibilities anyway? Do you see what I mean?
Well, it is part of your responsibility, but if you put that in the name, you don't have to put all of your responsibilities in the name, as long as you've got people understand generally what your areas are. And I think it's not necessarily the case that you have to put it in the name. That would, I don't know, what are other views?
I think one of the things that we talked about in the last meeting was whether Jasmine and I did a joint scrutiny, and then it kind of wouldn't matter if health was just with health, because if we're doing something together, then it brings in the children's bit and the health. But if we formed, I don't know if Shelley would allow us to do so, a subcommittee that was like a children's health committee for a specific inquiry or something.
Yeah, I think that would be a better way of doing it. That's my own view.
Well,
I mean, I don't know, anybody else got any views on this?
I mean, all I would say is that children's health would be remit of the committee in any event, whether we have a separate arrangement anyway, as far as I know. You know, I'm not opposed to doing joint work across the committee. You know, as long as we have the proper drafting of any joint groups, rather than having another separate committee that you're totally the opposite of wanting to add health to the name.
Okay.
Yeah.
He proposed that we maintain the current names of the previous year this year.
okay.
Any detractors from that? Is that okay? Good. Okay, that's agreed. So moving on to the election of the chairs of those subcommittees. Do we have any nominations for the chair of the health subcommittee?
I'd like to nominate.
Councillor Leary. Any other nominations? Seconded. Okay, congratulations,
Thanks.
Rebecca. Do you have any nominations for the chair of the children's subcommittee? You can nominate yourself.
All right, that's fantastic.
Yeah. I'll nominate you then.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, that's agreed. And finally, the Housing and Community Safety Scrutiny Subcommittee, I'd like to propose that Tom would be the chair. Second, any other nominations? No, great, okay, good. That's, so congratulations to all three of you. And that, Shelley, is there any other formal business that we need to...
Rosie, my colleague, when Nico a list of the members, I'm afraid I didn't notice that the vice chair weren't noted on it. I don't suppose you know who vice chairs are.
Sorry, off the top of my head I don't. I've got a list of, again, I've got the list of the names in front of me, but I can't recall who we sort of agreed as vice chair. But I'm sure I can send an email round afterwards if that's okay. Or
I think David had said he was going to stay on as vice chair, but you probably want to check. Well,
yeah, no, I will do.
That's electing first different area, but yes.
I'll double check and send an email round afterwards, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so no other formal business. So
I have one question.
Yes, go ahead.
Which is, last year we had a discussion about which topics OFC should keep control of and which topics the subcommittees were going to keep control of. And I wondered whether we needed just to review those at all. Because it's things like, and I'm not proposing that we change it, but things like free swimming and gyms we left with overall OFC, and some of the housing stuff we left at overall OFC. Just checking that we don't want to move anything else to you from us, or from here to Scrutiny subcommittees.
In terms of formal responsibilities, I'm comfortable with the way that it currently is. The way I see OSC being able to behave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that basically if we agree at this committee that we're going to go after a particular issue, we will, and we'll always seek to do that in a consensual way with the subcommittees, because there's absolutely no way we can avoid treading on the toes of the other subcommittees. And you know, that seemed to work pretty well last year, and hopefully it can continue to work that way. I mean, as hopefully you'll see in my presentation and in our discussion about our work programming, I'd like us to do more team working and working together, so that sometimes there may even be issues where we do a bit of the scrutiny, the subcommittee does a bit of the rest of the scrutiny, and we're a bit more flexible like that. So that would be how I would hope to see it continue in the current year. I mean, does that?
Yeah, that's fine. I just wondered whether there's anything you think of actually. I want to make sure that Oscar's definitely doing this.
Yeah. Well, personally, I'm happy with this, me being able to jump in and pick whatever issues I like at the moment. So obviously, I'm pretty happy with that situation. But you know, it is important we coordinate the work, and we need to make sure we keep doing that. And also coordinate with our audit committee as well, which we're now lucky enough to have the chair of on the committee, which I think is a welcome development. Okay, so we will now move on to our work programming for 20.
Chair, you should formally talk about the size of the subcommittees.
Okay, can we agree that the size of the subcommittees should remain the same as in previous years?
Yes.
I'm getting agreement.
Yes.
That's agreed, if we can record that. Great. Okay, so moving on to work programming from the coming year. So I have got a short presentation that I'd like to give, just because I think if we just from cold try and sit around and go, okay, what is it that we're going to look into in the coming year, it might be a bit strange, and particularly for the new members of the committee, it might seem odd that we're continuing with some things and not continuing with others. So rather than me sit directly in front of my own presentation, I'm going to move to the slide here. Are you okay sitting to the thanks. Cheers. Okay, so all I'm going to do, it's going to be really quick, is just quickly go over some of the stuff we did last year. I'm going to quickly look at some of the changes we made to the processes, things like doing webcasting. And then finally, put some suggestions that I've got for work we might want to do in the coming year. These are only my suggestions, and I'm perfectly happy if people think, well, no, we need to move that out, and people have got their own ideas. The whole point of this discussion is to get your ideas as well on things we might want to look into. So they're not in my presentation because I think they're set in stone. They're in my presentation because they're things that occur to me as things we might want to look into. So I'm completely open-minded about what our work programme should be. We've got a few ideas about the direction that we should be going in. So if we go on to the first slide, thanks, you're way ahead of me, Fitz. So obviously last year our big piece of work was procurement. That we spent a huge amount of time on that. We had a number of sessions and we produced a big report on that. That's currently in the process of going through us getting a response from the Cabinet, and I think that's going to be a really important piece of work that could make some big changes at the Council. Secondly, we had two kind of ongoing issues that we were chasing as they were happening, as they were developing. We had 3 swim and gym, so obviously we're at the point now where the pilots are happening, and 11,000 new homes. So I think we had useful sessions on those, but because they are ongoing issues, we're able to influence it to some extent. We made some good recommendations, I thought, on the communications side of the free swim and gym. But I put continue to monitor there because obviously they're ongoing issues, and we may want to come back to those in the coming year. Cycling strategy was something we covered. We had a session on that. School places, that's something that may or may not be continuing, so I'll talk about that when I come to the end of the presentation. We go to the next one. So casework systems we briefly looked at. That was a suggestion from Councillor Samurai. Regeneration schemes, we made a decision at the start of the year to try and track as many of the major regeneration schemes as possible, and we did that variously, particularly on the Aylesbury and also in Peckham as well. Then obviously we have the more routine elements of what we do. Routine not because they're boring, but because that's what every Oscar's done since its inception, doing the cabinet member interviews, doing budget scrutiny, and we had a number of call-ins as well, including a call-in that wasn't a call-in, you'll recall, which was on home care. So that's what we got through last year. I think budget scrutiny was very constructive, and we made some good recommendations came out of that. But obviously the challenge to us is to improve on that, get more work done this year. I hope get some more formal reports done. We've put a huge amount of time and resource into procurement, and maybe spread it out a little bit further on that. So we go on to the next one. So once I'm finished from the previous year. The first one there is on our agenda tonight, and we're going to have a brief discussion about that later, which is the council rents for premises. That's an ongoing piece of work, and it's one I'm personally quite keen for us to keep going on. School place planning, well, we had a bit of a false start, it feels to me, on that. We had a couple of useful sessions, and we were talking to people about local situations where schools might open, where they might not open. We started the process of doing a survey. We had a really interesting session where Harris came and spoke to us. My own view on that particular issue is that it's interesting for us to look at, but I always want us to add some value into whatever we're doing. And my own impression of that particular issue is it's very difficult for us as a committee to spread ourselves across the whole of the borough and say this should happen in this area, this should happen in this area, because actually it's very difficult for us to gather that kind of information because it's all about parent demand. And I'm a bit concerned that we could spend a lot of time continuing to work on that and not get a huge amount out of it at the end. That's just my view. If you think differently, let me know when we have our discussion later. So we go on to the next one. So innovations, two obvious ones. We've got live webcast and the really useful one also of survey of council staff. What I hope to happen with the webcasting is once we're comfortable with the technical side of it, that we can advertise it a lot earlier, we can get a bit more interest so we have more people watching it live, that we can use it more in terms of reviewing the work that's happened at the previous meeting, that people can use social media in order to tweet and share parts of the video of the meeting. So I hope that's something we can use more of now we've got the raw material of the actual recording. The survey of council staff, I thought that went really well, and there's some issues that are on my suggestions for stuff we look into following the discussion we had at our last meeting. And that's something I hope we should do again soon. We should go back to staff, and we should also go back to staff with a note, hopefully in the staff email that goes round, Shelley, just saying once we've agreed our work programme, if there's issues from that survey that we picked up, we can confirm back to staff, yes, we are looking into these issues and thanking them for their input. Okay. So the issues that did come out of the staff survey are the council's use of consultants. We discussed some of these last month, obviously. Last month. Housing policy for care leavers, and what we agreed for that was that Children's and Housing Subcommittee would work together on that, and presumably we're both still okay with that approach. We've got the same chair, so hopefully that's still okay. IT, which was the most popular issue, reported back by staff for understandable reasons. Obviously, since the survey has taken place, there's been a lot of improvements in the way IT is working, but do we want to go back and look at how that's bedding in? Council's approach to digital, our website, are we at the front of best practice in terms of the way councils can engage with the populations that they serve, with digital, with social media? What are we not doing at the moment? We're lucky enough to have Tom on this committee who has a professional involvement in that area. That's something I think we could get a lot out of, and it's something there's ongoing work at the council, and if we could feed into that, I think that would be really useful. Empty homes, that was another suggestion that came out of the staff survey, and we suggested, I think at the last meeting, that your committee, Tom, was going to take a look at that. So we'll kind of leave that one with you, I think. Okay, and finally on to my suggestions. So clearly, when we were all naively talking about the election at our last meeting about what was going to happen, and some of us were still holding out hope of having a Labour government. Obviously that hasn't happened, and we've got a majority Conservative government, which means we've got a very good idea now, particularly following the Queen's speech, where the government is going to go. And we'll all remember from the election campaign that big announcement about right to buy for the people who are tenants at housing associations. And the related policy, which is how the Conservatives said they were going to fund that right to buy, of forcing councils to sell in, quote, expensive areas. Now this is a policy that potentially has a massive impact on our borough. It could be genuinely damaging, I think. And I think what we need to do is, A, do a bit of work to show what the impact of that is going to be in a place like Southwark. So there's a kind of outward-facing point to doing it, and saying to people, this would be what would happen locally. Take a real example of a real borough and say, this would be what would happen if you'd introduced this. And also to make sure that the council is prepared for the introduction of that policy. We have a majority Conservative government. We have to work on the assumptions that the policies that are in their manifesto are going to be delivered by a Conservative government. Now, I put in brackets there, working with Housing Subcommittee, it's because Tom and I have had a chat about this already, and I think I'll admit my instinctive way of working is to take an issue and go away and sit in a darkened room and work on it myself, and then come back to these committee meetings and report on progress sometimes. And I know that's not always the best way, it's usually not the best way of doing things. And what I want to do more of this year is more team working on the committee and with the subcommittees as well. And I think it would be really good if we could take that issue as an OSC issue, it would be an OSC report, but we actually got input from sessions and work that comes in from Tom's committee as well. And there's some people on Tom's committee who are actually working in this particular area in the legal field professionally, so we want to take advantage of that as well. So continuing issue would be council reps for voluntary and business premises. I'm really keen to keep looking at that area. I think we've had some interesting sessions on it so far, and I want to quickly get to the point where we've got a report that can make recommendations. And as the people who were on the committee last year will know, one of the key issues is how open and transparent the council is with the information it shares on what it is charging people to rent those premises. I won't say any more about that at the moment because we've got it on our agenda later in this meeting. I would like to look at our approach to digital. I would like to look at our IT systems. And my final suggestion there, just to explain a little bit, underpayment of national minimum wage in Southwark. Now, clearly most of the work we do is about looking internally at the council about how it's working, seeing if we can make recommendations to improve that, and then that hopefully then has a knock-on effect in improving services for people who live in Southwark. We don't have any responsibility for enforcing the national minimum wage in this borough, but we know that across the country this is a massive issue, underpayment of the national minimum wage. And I suspect it's a massive issue in our borough as well, and that there's lots and lots of people, I don't want to put a number on it at this stage, but lots and lots of people who are being paid less than the national minimum wage illegally. And I think it would be interesting for us to try and gather some information on what is happening in our borough on that issue, and to work with the teams that we have here at the council to make some suggestions about how we might reduce the number of people that are being paid less than the national minimum wage. That's obviously a bit of a tricky situation because we don't have any formal responsibility for it. That sits with HMRC at the moment. But that's just a suggestion. Our final slide is, I thought it was useful last year when we said, okay, well, how do we want to do things differently? And some real changes have come out of that, including the staff survey and webcasting our meetings. But I don't think we should sit still on that. We should always look at, we shouldn't just get into the process of just doing the same things over and over again. So 3 areas that spring to mind for me, areas we might want to change or we want to look at, are more team working, which I've already spoken about, how we do our cabinet member interviews as well, because I think some of our cabinet member interviews were really useful last year, but sometimes, being critical of ourselves, I would say that we would ask a question, the cabinet member would tell us everything they knew about the area, and it perhaps wasn't as forensic as it might have been. We could have, and then, you know, the way other committees do these things sometimes, you know, committees at a more elevated level than ours is, you know, they might assign responsibility to 1 or 2 members of the committee to go away and, you know, make sure they've done all of their research before the meeting, and then they are the people that lead on the questioning during the meeting. I mean, maybe we want to do it that way this time. But again, I'll get your views on that. And then finally, budget scrutiny. I thought it went well last year, but you know, we might want to look at if we do it differently. So that's just my opening comments to start the discussion off. I thought maybe before we just launch into a free-fall of discussion, maybe we want to just go around the room and just get thoughts from people on some of the things I've raised there, which I know there's a number of issues, and any suggestions that you have for areas we might want to look into as well. And then from that, we'll try and bring together some sort of a work programme that we'll obviously confirm in writing after this meeting. So, am I dropping in at the deep end, Paul, if I start at your end of the room and go from there? Or if you'd like to pass on to Jasmine might have some thoughts in it.
Yeah, you go first.
You go
and then
first.
I'll go back.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I think that's a fair enough report, and you know, it's very positive. I'm quite looking forward to getting, you know, my teeth into some of the subjects.
Yeah.
I think in lessons, I do sympathise with some of your concluding comments really, because I was thinking about how we might do things better ourselves. I mean, when I come to talk about my reviews, there might be some lessons that we can learn from that. But I definitely think, you know, that how we scrutinise officers, or cabinet members rather, you know, we should change that a little bit. And one of the things that we could do is go back to the suggestions from Shelley's training about, you know, having pre-meets and using them well. You know, some of the pre-meetings we could look at distributing questions based on the reading that we've had. I think that's what I do with my committee. You know, if we've got a cabinet member, we usually have a pre-meeting, and then, you know, I usually think of some questions just in case, based on the research that I've done. You know, someone takes the leadership of that and then distributes the questions.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds a bit staged, but it does help you get to the point more.
Okay.
I think the other thing is, I suppose it's preparation, isn't it? You know, because we've got, maybe if we just allow ourselves the time to actually read their reports, you know, we might get to the issue, because I suppose not so much the cabinet members, but when you're looking at reports from officers, you know, there's always that spin on it, isn't it? Because if you're writing a report, you think of all the positives, unless you're a real pessimist. I don't think you have many of them in the council. But you know, it's only by, you know, the preparation that you actually look at it twice or three times. I think, just a minute, that's not a very, very positive headline. So I think, you know, the preparation really before those meetings. And I'm wondering, you know, when I look back to how we did the budget meeting, how prepared you can really be by having that quick fire, one after the other. Do you know what I mean? Because actually, it's quite dizzying, you know, and you're having to think about how you pose the questions, whether they're relevant, when, you know, one after another, when actually you should be giving them the attention that they deserve, really.
Okay. And your thoughts on the suggested items I've put up for the coming year, or any other ideas of your own?
I think they're good. But the lesson seems to be, I mean, when I had a policy seminar for the work that I did, and one of the things that people keep coming up to me and saying is that they could not believe, you know, that we're so disjointed, you know, the services. So I think, you know, your idea for teamwork, cross-cutting, you know, would really catch officers, not that we're about catching officers off the hook for cabinet members, but it's slightly unnerving. If we're joined up around our scrutiny, then actually that will lead the way, really, and it will make people think that actually they have to do the joining up as well. So I think if we add that as a golden thread to your, you know, work programme, which I think is very good, then, you know, that will be a good start. And also the fact that we're all coming to this for our second year will mean that we will probably work very closely anyway. So just making those joins.
Good.
Thank you. It looks like there's quite a lot of housing issues, which is absolutely right, because housing is such a big thing for Southwark. And I think there'll just need to be some distinction about what goes to the housing subcommittee and what goes to overview and scrutiny. I think the idea about the impact that the selling off, that whatever, like, is fully formed in the Queen's speech about housing association housing and the impact that that would have on the borough. I think that would be a very interesting and important piece of work to do. I'm just questioning exactly where that would sit. I think the thing about the minimum wage is interesting, and it isn't obvious where that would, who would do that if we didn't do that.
Yeah.
And I think these are both picking up on issues that will be falling out of the new Conservative government.
Yeah.
So I think those will be powerful things to look at.
Right.
With IT, I think we do definitely need to do something about IT, but I think the question is what.
Yeah. If we just did IT.
So I think it's about having really targeted questions, sort of scrutinising what is.
The thing
what
that's
are the
obviously
issues
most
that are
important
bothering people
in IT is, you know, the stories we were hearing when things were going wrong, when the new contract started, was that, you know, people who were delivering really crucial services to vulnerable people actually weren't able to access files that they needed to access and things like that. So maybe our starting point on that needs to, you know, rather than, you know, the bells and whistles.
Yeah, so what is the impact on essential services kind of thing, and that's the...
Okay.
But yeah, I think we mustn't ignore IT because it was so overwhelmingly the thing that people wanted to scrutinise. So around the budget scrutiny, again, I think that was really powerful and effective. The bit that I got confused by was the fact that cabinet portfolios don't line up with areas of the council neatly, which meant that we had a document which had lots of things categorised by council departments, and then we were interviewing a series of people based on cabinet portfolio. Yeah. So we could have missed things if we weren't carefully cross-referring.
Okay, that's fine. What I'll do is, once we've had this discussion tonight, is put together a brief, you know, 2-3 page paper that we'll agree at the next meeting, just to say yes, you know, because obviously it's a bit difficult to list everything in one go here this evening. But those are the kinds of things that I'll make a note of them all now, and then we'll include those in the paper. Okay, great. Rose.
I mean, firstly, I'd agree. I think the item on the kind of impact of the right to buy extending to housing associations would be really interesting. I mean, a couple of the things that I was going to sort of suggest as things that I would like to keep looking at were kind of already included in there. So yeah, I'm really keen that we keep getting updates on the free swim and gym promise and the 11,000 homes. Okay. It sounds like we will be anyway. I suppose the other thing I was just going to say is obviously we mentioned that we've had kind of every kind of few meetings we've had an update on one or other kind of item of regeneration or area of regeneration in the borough. I suppose I'm really keen, just because regeneration is not covered by any of the subcommittees, that we kind of make sure that we're having a really thorough look at that. Maybe not just each piece of regeneration in isolation, but maybe an item on the wider impacts of regeneration across the borough, or looking maybe at those individual instances that slightly more widely than just exactly how the progress is going, maybe, you know, benefits to residents, benefits in the wider area surrounding them, something like that. I mean, it's not kind of fully formed idea, I guess. And then, I thought it was interesting what you said about school-closed planning. I do agree that there are obviously some limitations to what we can do as a kind of Southwark-wide committee, because obviously the different pressures will be so different. You know, even at a ward level, there'll be different pressures in different parts of the ward. So I think it would be interesting maybe for us to give some thought as to, I don't know, how else that could be scrutinised if we're not doing it. I suppose obviously in the education subcommittee you've got the same challenge, because again it's a cross Southwark committee, but I suppose I'm just keen that we don't lose focus on that entirely. You know, it's obviously an important issue, and one where we've had some challenges in the past.
Okay. Well, maybe we could have a chat about that. Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. Sorry, John. That's all right. That's all right. Welcome. I won't throw you in at the deep end. I don't know, because I literally didn't see when you came in, but
With the intention.
You wisely missed my presentation, but we're just obviously having a discussion about what issues we might look into next year, and also any changes that we might want to make to things like cabinet member interviews or our budget scrutiny and that kind of thing as well. So, but I'll come back to you in a moment. Okay.
I think on the cabinet interviews side of things, it's something that I know, and it kind of plays to Catherine's point actually, that our portfolios aren't aligned with our departments necessarily. That I think last year we did like three or four cabinet member interviews, which took up quite a lot of time from my committee, and I think therefore we probably need to find a different way of doing it, or a better way of doing it, because as you say, people tend to come along and talk about all the things that are involved in their portfolio, and it's not necessarily as structured as it should be, that we're getting something valuable out of it. And then when we do budget scrutiny, you just get a repeat of sometimes of what you've already, we're kind of doing the same thing twice in some situations. So we might just need to rethink how we do it. I don't know what the solution to that is. But I think we just need to make sure we're not crossing over too much.
Yeah, we need to avoid duplication. I mean, it's like, you know, you have little enough time and few enough meetings as it is in order to get through the work. You know, you don't want to have cabinet members having to do that. You know, it's okay when you get cabinet members to come along and talk about a specific issue. That's obviously that helps you. But if you're just, you know, allowing another period of time that you would use constructively on something else to just listen to the same thing, then there's no point in doing that.
Yeah, exactly. And then I had a couple of thoughts around other things that we might want to do, and I don't know if they actually fall into this committee or whether we need to point to them elsewhere. So is there something around looking at the impact of cuts to local government and the impact on us as a council? I don't know whether that's something that falls more to audit, or whether we do it on, or whether it's the impact on staff and the impact on
to a degree, and I think that we will have a conversation on the committee about how far that goes, but in as much as it is looking at it from an audit perspective and the risk that it poses to the council rather than its actual impact in reality on services, that seems to be a bit more off. But perhaps, I mean, evidently cuts are now going to be a big part of it, and perhaps we have a conversation that joins a piece of work about doing both ends.
Okay. I think that would be. You know, it's quite scary thinking about the cuts that are going to be coming. We all know that they're coming now, and we all know how difficult it was last year during budget scrutiny, looking at some of the areas. We know how difficult it was, you know, shortly after the 2010 general election, when we were having to look at things that, you know, the council ordinarily would not want to look at. And we're really getting to the point now where you know, things are going to be cut that people would never imagined would have been cut previously. And people would have seen the letter that went from 370 or so council leaders, you know, many of them Conservatives, saying that we've cut to the bone already, we can't cut any more. And you know, that's the situation here as it is elsewhere. So I think a bit of joined up working on cuts, maybe if, you know, it would seem natural for us to do the work on, you know, impact on services, you know, that kind of thing, and then tally that up with the work that you do on kind of risks to the council. And I think maybe if we have, you know, meetings outside of this particular meeting call and go over the detail of that, would probably be useful. Okay, good.
And then the other one is something, and I think it's potentially because it's too big an issue for a single committee to deal with. It's something around this idea that we've got of creating Southwark as an age-friendly borough. Because I think, and I've kind of written down a few, I think it probably crosses things like digital, housing, health, communities and skills, and kind of generally how we do all of those things, which giving that to one committee is going to take their whole year out, I imagine, or it would take all three of us out because we're doing different bits of it. But is there something around looking at how we are trying to do it? Because from what I've seen, I'm not sure I haven't seen anything that sets out kind of how we want to do it or what we want to be doing, and do we want to be part of actually forming some of that thought process and putting some more ideas forward.
Good, okay. Right, there's some great suggestions there, okay. Maybe.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Going to the next. Obviously I'm new to the committee, so do chip in if these things already exist or you know, it's an obvious question. I guess the point that kind of struck me about this teamwork and how we work between subcommittees in this is, I'm not aware subcommittees have a meeting like this where you then do an agenda planning, and is that then fed back to us, and when is that is going to be fed back by, and sort of what is that?
Good point. I suppose what we should have is at our next meeting. Presumably, you will have had all the subcommittees will have met at least once before the next meeting of OSC. Am I right in assuming?
Shelley's thinking ahead of you.
No, right. Okay, so you won't. So what I was going to say.
We had an early meeting, and this is an early meeting in order to appoint the chair.
Right.
Start thinking.
Okay.
Sort of meets again on the 15th of June, and then the subcommittee starts.
Okay.
I can't entirely explain.
Okay. So in answer to your question, then, Maisie, probably what we should do is not our next meeting, but the meeting after that, is we should have an item on the agenda where the subcommittees report back to us on their work programmes. And clearly a number of those issues will be things that both OSC is looking at and the subcommittees are looking at.
But what I tend to do, at least, and I'm sure Jeff can do something, is sit down with our new committee and go, what things do we want to look at, and basically have this discussion whether it's at a meeting or we can do it before, because actually we have less meetings in a year, so it uses up a whole meeting now.
I was only thinking because in terms of kind of setting out an annual agenda for us, that would be, they're totally dependent on each other. That would be my sort of reaction, and also the issue of not wanting to double up, but also not missing things. So I don't know when our sort of agenda is going to start set in stone, or maybe it doesn't happen. But anyway, that's just an observation.
Okay.
Otherwise, I mean, I think some of these suggestions are really, really good. I think the right to buy bit of work is really important, and there's probably other bits of the Conservative manifesto that we might want to think about. I mean, I know, again, we don't have any numbers yet, but kind of, and maybe someone else will cover this, but impact of welfare. Cuts, hardship funding, and also maybe that links in slightly to homelessness, which was an issue that I don't know if anyone was covering, or perhaps a housing issue, but so that's something that kind of came to mind. Age-friendly borough, I think that's a really important one, and I thought that also links into transport, because I know there's often, talk of a pedestrian strategy and things like that, so that's just an idea about how we could maybe pull together different strands under one umbrella like that.
Okay.
Also something that struck me, 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. I don't know if anyone's doing anything on that, and kind of enforcement of it, impacts of it. I mean, again, that's just an idea, but it's a very kind of visible change that's happened in the borough recently, and one that many residents will be they'll be thinking about day to day, kind of so that's 20 mile an hour. So kind of find some measurables around that. And the regeneration piece, an idea I had as well is kind of, when we think of regeneration, I think we often think of housing and public realm, but also the kind of link regeneration and business, and how that also links into employment. So that kind of business angle to regeneration projects, I think, is really interesting, and one that doesn't neatly fall under a kind of any category.
How many jobs are we creating out of
and who's
schemes?
getting those jobs?
And
how many of the businesses that are there currently in a to be regenerated area? Where are they going to be, and what are the arrangements of their kind of continuity of business and kind of retail provision in regeneration areas. Oh, the other thing, underpayment in national minimum wage, I was thinking as well. I don't know if anyone's doing any work on London living wage, and that covers kind of progress with that, because I know it's more or less been rolled out by the council, but there's bits and bobs that haven't been done yet, and that's kind of an interesting area.
I almost added it on, actually, and I wondered about whether or not we were biting off more than we could chew. But on living wage, obviously we've got it as a directly delivered thing through the council and through contractors, but a bit of work around what more can we do to encourage the living wage to be paid, in the private sector, in the voluntary sector, in our borough, so that we become an exemplar on the living wage. That would be interesting, and it is kind of linked to the national minimum wage issue in some ways. Low pay is very much linked to aspirations for higher pay. So okay.
So I guess it could be a bigger piece. It's just about low pay.
Okay.
So anyway, those are some of the thoughts I have.
Great. No, that's really, really useful. And I should say as well, before I let you come in, Tom, one thing I just basically forgot on that last slide. You see from the staff survey, one of the things that staff suggested we look into was the council's use of consultants. Kind of linked into that stuff on cuts and where efficiencies might be made. That I think would be an interesting thing to look at as well, because even though we have made dramatic cuts in the amount of money we're spending on consultants, I still think that there's probably more that could be made there. Occasionally you see things around the council and you think, what, why have we got an external person in to do that when we could have been doing it ourselves? So yeah, okay, sorry, Tom.
Thanks, Gavin. Just a few thoughts. Digital, potentially huge area.
Yeah.
Could be too big. We are looking in housing. We are looking at some of the housing repair side of that already. There's a new system in place where you get to click on problems that's supposed to make repairs more accurate in terms of when maybe going to turn up. So I have a login to that already. I'm already playing with that. So I think happy to keep looking at that side. My thought was perhaps, like we talked about earlier, I think that if you kick off with interviewing Rada about what she's hoping to do as Deputy Cabinet Member, then we'll get some idea of her priorities for the year, and then we can, that'll probably give some ideas about what areas to look at and what assistance we can provide to any projects that she's trying to get off the ground. I'm just thinking back to stuff we did last year. Can we go back to PAC? That was quite interesting. We talked about how we question. We learned a lot, certainly quite a number of members of my committee went on that visit. We learned a lot, and Johnson and I and Claire and others last year.
Public Accounts Committee.
We learned a lot about questioning from them, and we've used those techniques in housing since, about allowing someone to lead on something and trying to stay on a subject as well. And they were very kind last year in letting us stay behind afterwards and talk to us about some of their techniques and how they do stuff. I believe there's a change of chair coming for that. Margaret Hodges is actually stepping down. So maybe we should approach the new one and see if we can get in early. And if not them, then any select committee at the House or any of the GLA committees as well. I think I'd quite like to. I spoke to Len a bit last year on the community safety side. I certainly will hope to bring people over and try and do something with Tom in housing as well.
Is Val back chairing transport now as well?
She is. That might be one that we should go and see them in action. In terms of innovation, when you touched on stuff that we've achieved this year, like streaming, involving as well. So, for example, when we interviewed the borough commander, I took questions on Twitter. And we were just talking about livening up cabinet interviews. Because potentially
that's good. That's good. So we have we have a leader interview each year, and obviously other cabinet members as well. So we would have either a hashtag or just they would mention whoever the chair, and then I would be able to see the questions that were coming in.
You see them on Twitter and pick a few.
And pick a few that go in. I think it's a really good idea.
It might just make them a bit more interesting and a bit more predictable as well. It's fun.
Okay, I'm sure the Cabinet will be delighted with that suggestion.
I wish I wasn't recorded saying that. So in terms of 11,000, I'm just thinking, like, in terms of monitoring, like what we're going to monitor, because obviously we'll be delivering that for a number of years. Is that something we always monitor throughout that delivery, or do we perhaps say, let's have a look at Willow Walk and scrutinise Willow Walk as a development, what went well, what didn't, what's going to change, what we've learned from it from the first council delivered housing in a number of years. So it might be worth concentrating on that, or another development as we come in, and see whether we can learn any specifics from that, as well as keep an eye on the overall. Visits, again from housing, I think Johnson and I have both been plumbers for the day in the past, as well as we've been out noise teams and all kinds of things like that. If there's any that fit in with, especially around, minimum wage, there's a possibility of getting out into the community and seeing people and seeing perhaps some of the sorts of workplaces that are affected the most by underpayment of
national
wage, and for digital and IT and so on as well. Maybe we can go and see what other people do. And finally, the survey was good last year, so could that be an annual survey?
Well, as you know, it took some. It was quite a challenge getting that email sent out, and I'm really pleased that it's come back with some constructive stuff, and that the sky didn't fall in when that email was sent out. And I think we should probably do it again soon. Whether or not we make it exactly annual, I'm open-minded about that. But I think it's definitely a good place to start. One thing we didn't do last year was basically open up that very, very simple survey page to the public. You know, so we think we should probably do that this year. We kind of collected because as we said, the staff the eyes and ears of the council. What were they picking up internally? We probably need that externally as well. And then maybe that will feed into next year's work programme. So yeah, okay, let's do that. Okay. And I'm fine. You're fine. I'm fine. Okay. And last but not least,
apologies once again.
Sorry. I'll come to you first. I'll come to you first.
I was promised last week. Yeah, I think from what you've said and from what other people said, I like the idea of actually narrowing down cabinet interviews to much more specific topics.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it helps the cabinet member to deliver a more accurate response as well by bringing the officers that they actually need. And I think from my experience with subcommittees and indeed of audit and governance last year, we were in a situation where we had people ruining their home lives, sat there for an entire evening who said nothing, but actually then ended up with the one person you need to speak to not being there and the written report being provided later. And I also liked your suggestion as well about tasking individuals on the committee either with the entirety of the issue to lead on it, with other members being able to come in, or tasking different areas with different individuals. I think that helps do that because, I mean, as we all know, the sheer colossal size of some of these papers and bundles that we go through, it's very difficult to really hone in on where they might
be. And it would actually, on that point, it will actually take quite a lot of discipline from the other members of the committee to enable that to happen. If we give it to a couple of people, at times it will mean me keeping my mouth shut and not, for a while, which is unusual, as you know. So,
interrupted.
Yeah. Indeed. Please go ahead. What you were saying.
I just. I think that's important. I mean, I think in terms of the topics that have been discussed, I think the national minimum wage element is an excellent idea, and I don't think we should view it as something just simply where we're doing it as a kind of piece of publicity or lobbying work. Yeah. My experience in my day job of dealing with the low-pay commissioners has been that they are desperately under-resourced in terms of enforcing the law, in terms of making very meaningful proposals to the government in very often, in my case, quite peculiar and specific circumstances. They have been very, very good. Yeah. And inviting them and perhaps submitting a report to them and having conversations with them afterwards, I really don't think is barking up the wrong tree. I also think that the thing with this government, and indeed with the Scottish problem and the various issues of devolution everywhere, there is a bit of an open season about councils making a grab over things that we can do more effective locally. I think that handing over degrees of public health to local authorities is something that the Conservatives have been openly quite proud about from the last administration. And if we're making a claim that job-finding, job-seeking services should be coming to the council, and actually because we understand local businesses, we can ensure their quality terms and conditions and ensure that the people are getting them, that's not a bad lobbying perspective to come from. Even if we then end up working with the CAB to make people aware, the majority of minimum wage enforcement comes from the individuals themselves, not from HMRC. It comes through employment tribunals, it comes through getting out advice about what you're entitled to, what rights really mean. An awful lot of confusion in immigrant communities about whether they are entitled to fewer rights because they are immigrant communities. That's a big issue with Eastern Europeans in particular, or Central Eastern Europeans. So I think it would be a really excellent piece where we could do something meaningful and not just do it something where we don't really have power, but we could have an effect. The right to buy element and the housing association area, I think it would be really, really good to do a borough-wide look at it. One of the concerns I have is about the impacts on regeneration. Let's talk about the Aylesbury going on for 2 decades. The implication of us being forced to sell higher value properties. Realistically, as that regeneration goes on, that may well include us being compelled to sell the Aylesbury, which we then pull down. increasing all of the problems and indeed the risks to the council. And I think from the perspective of audit and governance, to do that piece of work, what would the borough look like as this policy develops, and then to pass that on to audit and governance to look at the risks that are involved in financial risks for the next civic year would be good. And I like the idea again of being very narrow and specific in what we're looking at. I think Willow Walk is a really great idea to kind of make it a bit more real. The last thing I'll say in terms of, and particularly again about linking up, IT is up there. I mean, we as an Audit and Governance Committee last year looked at IT, and I think that the response we received in terms of making us confident that there was no further risk to the council, and indeed that the governance of those contracts is responsible, I don't think was adequate enough. I think the committee felt that quite strongly. Indeed, I think the officers, full credit to them, once they reviewed it, they also acknowledged that there were serious deficiencies. And in that instance where we have a contract which is failing, but actually where we feel that the value of that contract is the best we're going to get, we feel that it's working, we feel that it's comparable to things that other people are getting. It's very much the governance, the day-to-day monitoring of that, the minimising of the risk, the stuff that people are talking about, the access that key workers have to things when things go wrong. I think that's something that we can do a piece of joint work on, identifying where it's failing in the contract, where it's failing in governance, and where it represents a risk to the council.
Thank you. That's very useful. Angela.
Yeah, apologies once again. Hopefully, I'm not covering what's already been said, so apologies if I am. Just sprung to mind after the discussion around the staff survey, really good last year. Because I feel, because we know the cups will be quite deep, morale's going to be an interesting, good discussion to have. And I was wondering, would it be possible for us to send out an email to staff, and just to say how it would work, but just to say this is what you brought up, and this is what we're going to look at.
We did say that,
Okay,
no, but great minds think alike. Yeah, we definitely want to do that straight away. To say we've agreed our work programme now, and we picked up these issues. So
redundancies. I know. Apologies, Fiona Colley mentioned, at the end of the last budget interview, she did say it was something that they go back and look at again. So it would be good if we can look at it this year.
Yeah, particularly as they've.
Go on.
Just to let you know, Chair, there is currently a voluntary severance package being offered in certain departments which are undergoing reorganisation. I believe that at least 200 people have put in the voluntary severance so far.
Okay. That's what I was about to say.
Oh, sorry.
So I didn't know the details either, but yeah, I think it's an interesting area that we could come back to, maybe through budget scrutiny again. Okay, sorry.
And probably might be too much for this year, but something we should probably consider is properties. I know we had a look at it, I'm not sure if it was this organisation, this scrutiny, or was it housing? But I know we had a look at it in terms of how our commercial properties were being let and how they were being sold as well, and just in impending kind of pressures to their budgets, and just making sure that it's all joined up and seeing how it's moved on from last year. So it'd be interesting to have a look at that.
I think finishing off that piece of work is going to be our first urgent task.
Brilliant.
Okay.
And just to follow on what everyone seems to have kind of talked about is ensuring that we're as efficient as possible. So more building on from the digital stuff is just multiple strands of working together. So I know at the interview that we did of cabinet members last time, or was it at a budget meeting? One of the cabinet members mentioned that within community safety they're going to look at multiple ways. So essentially, people looking at operatives looking at different ways of working and being more efficient and being more innovative. So seeing if it's something we could do across the piece, or just exploring it that little bit more, would be interesting as well.
There's a working group, isn't there, on working on that area at the moment of officers, an officer working group. I think there's several in there. There's one on digital, there's one on, but I mean, maybe we could talk to them if we wanted to.
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay.
That's a lot.
So, no, I mean, but obviously there are lots of issues that have been suggested, and we just from a practical point of view, we can't do all of them. But what we can do is cover as many of them as possible, in as much detail as possible, including making sure that we're coordinating with the subcommittees, which is how we'll get more work done. Sorry, Jessica.
Sorry, I was going to say that maybe if we have this draft and then we look at it in the light of the subcommittee work programmes as well.
What I mean, just to summarise, what the additional issues that I picked up, and I'm not suggesting this is our work programme, but so as well as right to buy, council rents for voluntary premises, our approach to digital, IT systems, underpayment of the national minimum wage, our approach to consultants, Willow Walk as a specific example of council delivered housing, looking at regeneration, then looking at our approach to cuts and doing a bit of joint working with audit and governance, and age-friendly borough, which I think is quite a popular one around the committee. The impact on welfare and homelessness, 20 mile per hour speed limit, looking at how that's been implemented. That would be an interesting one because it's quite discreet. Widening out the national minimum wage stuff onto low pay as well. You know, I think they're the main ones. And then some of the other innovations that were mentioned, such as going to the Public Accounts Committee. Again, what I'll try and do is put together a paper, and I'll keep in mind some timetabling of what I think will be deliverable out of that list. And I'll explicitly say what I don't think we're going to be able to cover this year, right? I will not just prioritise my own ideas over other people's ideas. So you can watch out for that if you want to. And then we will agree that as our work programme at the next committee. What I won't do is just wait for us to agree that and then not have anything on the agenda at the next meeting, because we have few enough meetings as it is, so we need to get going. So I will speak to you all informally before that meeting and work out issues we can get going with already. Obviously there's the issue on council rents, which we're currently already looking into. Are people happy with that as an approach?
Can I, sorry to jump in for another few ideas, because I know you've got those on there, but I kind of thought of them when the 20 mile an hour policy came up, that there were obviously a couple of other quite big transport things going on in the borough, so obviously progress towards the extension of the Bakerloo line is another one, and then also looking at the implementation of the cycling strategy, or the kind of the next steps in developing that anyway. And I don't know if maybe they could all be grouped together in a sort of transport themed meeting, or maybe they're just things that we could get more discrete updates.
Some of these will be us having a session on it, looking into it a little bit, talking to the relevant people, satisfying ourselves that we're generally happy with the approach and making some recommendations for changes. Some of these other ones will be us looking at it absolutely in depth and producing reports. The latter is much more time consuming than the former, for obvious reasons. And so when I do this paper, I'll try and make that clear what I think we're going to spend some sessions on. It may be that we'll spend a session on it, fine, we're not very happy at all, and then it becomes a bigger piece of work. But I think initially some of these will be that, and I think they might fall under that heading.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that you've got it's an excellent work programme. It's quite big, but there are some other gigantic things not on there, but which can be picked up by the subcommittees, I hope. But for example, the youth offer, employment, time with the plan for apprenticeship. So hopefully we can pick that up. Yeah. But I'm just raising that now because to give a bit of balance to that, really, because you've got all the giant topics. And that seems to be missing, so that's why I'm just mentioning that. It's
occupational hazard for scrutiny committees. You'll come up with a work programme, you'll be very proud of it, and then somebody goes, "What? You're not looking into X, Y, Z? It's so obvious that you should be looking into that," but that's just the way it goes, unfortunately. Okay, so I know I'm kind of parking this a little bit by saying that I'll write a paper based on this discussion, but we'll do that, and then we will move ahead at the next meeting. Are people happy with that approach? Good.
Well done.
Okay, good. That's really useful. Thank you. Move back to where I was.